What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday, and welcome to episode 12 of the ERCast, your weekly Friday Night Magic Commander pre-show. I'm your co-host, Cory, and with me this week, as always, is the Wanderer of the Wilds of Eldraine, Cole.
How's it going, everybody?
Oh, what's going on? We did a little Wild Eldraine draft action this weekend?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to hit up the pre-release at my local game store for the Wilds of Eldraine, set that's coming out this upcoming weekend, and it was a ton of fun. Um, pulled some good cards and had a good time. Didn't win very many games, but at the end of the day, we don't play to win. We play to smile.
I think everybody that has ever drafted in any format has to come in with that mentality of we don't play to win, because you just don't have the guarantee that you're going to pull, amazing things.
You'd be impressed with some of the decks that these guys put together, but I think it just comes with a lot of practice and a lot of a little bit of luck. A lot of practice, a little bit of luck.
You have your eye on any particular commander out of the set?
Yeah, I actually kind of drafted up a deck for Agatha,
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. Give me a second. You're gonna have to cut this out. But Agatha of the Vile Cauldron. Uh,
Okay.
she's pretty interesting. She's got she reduces the cost of activated abilities on your creatures and has the added benefit of buffing your creatures and giving them trample until end of turn as an activated ability. So she's kind of got a win con built in there, and having activated
Mhm.
abilities that you can activate on everybody's turn kind of gives you a fun level of interaction that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. I'm kind of interested in checking out. Was it a Reet? The one that's Orzhov, and then basically turns everything into like a like an arrest kind of effect as far as enchantments.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Is she the one that doubles? Like she creates a copy?
No. So she's the one. If you place an aura, like any of your opponent's creatures that are equipped with an aura that you control, they can't attack you. And
Oh,
then
okay,
on, I
okay,
believe it's your instep, you deal X damage to everybody equal to the amount of auras you control.
okay. Yeah, that
So
that
I don't
sounds like
know.
a
It
ton of
seems
fun.
interesting.
I
But
did
we're not
pull.
here. uh,
Oh well, I just wanted to mention I did pull one really cool card. It's the Rowan Scion of War, which is a very interesting card if you're thinking about gaining a ton of mana and pumping it all into a big X spell and draining the table of life. It's a pretty fun little
Which is always, I mean,
commander.
that's always a fun way to go. Speaking of someone who has that as their win con in more than one deck, I would say. Yeah, that's the way I love to go. Big X spells, wipe out the board while you can.
Absolutely.
Um, I will say though, big X spells kind of lead us into our topic of today, which is salty commanders, because a lot of people don't like big X spells. Looking at you, Torment of Hellfire, being blasted in their face. But today, Cole and I have gone through the deepest, darkest dungeons of Reddit and social media and EDH Rec, and we've compiled the saltiest commanders, according to you guys, that exist in the game of Magic, and we're going to talk about what's a salty commander. Is it okay to attack? I'm sorry, not attack. Is it okay to play, or is it okay to attack with them? And how do you deal with it when your table is playing the saltiest of pods? Um, I think we kick this off. What is a salty commander, Cole? How do you define in your brain what's salt and what's spice?
Well, a salty commander is going to be any commander that you sit down and you immediately go, ugh, when somebody reveals that they're playing them. Sometimes it's in your own play group, and sometimes it's with strangers. It's a commander that typically needs a bit of a vetting before you can trust that it's going to be a fun play experience. Sometimes they're overplayed, sometimes they're overpowered, but they all share one thing in common, and that's that they're going to make you pretty frustrated. They're going to get into your head.
Yeah, I think that's a good summation. They're typically commanders that you look at, and you're right. You do have that kind of like, oh, this one. Now, I'll say in our pod, that's pretty much any commander Cole plays. So he doesn't even reveal his commander yet. He sits down, and I'm already like, oh, this guy and his deck. Now, what is salty will obviously vary from pod to pod. Some pods are okay with having high levels of salt, and some play pods are not. So, I think all these do require discussion.
But at the end of the day, you can play anything. It can be leveled down. These don't have to be salty. They just tend to lend themselves towards saltier builds.
Yep. So, kicking off our list, so we kind of organized it in, I think, a smart way, which is ones that tend to be salty, and then we've got a second back half that are things that tend to be um let me rephrase that. So we're going to start off with things that tend to be salty due to their play style, and then we've got a back half of things that tend to be salty due to the fact that they're either overpowered, or they seem like they control the game a little more, or they break that symmetry of one player getting to play more commander than everyone else at the pod. So we're going to kick it off with salty play patterns. And when you look at the EDH rec list, well, can you guess what is the, according to them, I guess according to the internet, the single most saltiest commander in all of Magic history?
Hmm. Well, I almost have half a mind to say Atraxa due to the discrimination I have received for playing Atraxa, but my guess would go to Turgrid, the God of Fright.
So I will say both those are good guesses. They were both up there. So Atraxa is one we're not talking about today, or at least we're not talking about yet so far. Um, but Atraxa was up there, and Turgrid also was up there. But neither of them took the top spot. Neither of them, in fact, were even in the top five. Uh, the top spot actually was Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger,
Wow.
and the remaining of the top five was essentially all the other Praetors. With the exception of Urabrask, I guess nobody hates on Urabrask.
He's pretty chill out of all the Praetors, personality wise. He's the one you'd want to hang out with.
um, let's talk about that. So I think the Praetors as a whole are probably the first thing we should look at because they dominate the list. I think they're kind of naturally printed in a way that leads to unfun gameplay if you build a deck to like really maximize it.
Well, they all share a quality in that they buff up your board or your board state pretty significantly, and then they negatively affect your opponent's board state. So, in the case of Vorinclex, if you're unfamiliar, whenever you tap a land for mana, you generate an additional land, but whenever your opponents tap a land for mana, that land doesn't untap until its controller's next untap step. So, you effectively half your opponent's mana while doubling your own. And the others that are up on that list, Jin Cataxis, Lesh Norn, they're going to either minimize, reduce the power and toughness of your opponent's creatures while buffing your own, or
Mm.
reducing your opponent's hand size while drawing you cards, or copying your spells and countering your opponents. So it's all kind of if you can speed into one of these creatures, it can be pretty impactful to your opponent's board state.
Yeah, and I think too, the level of, I guess, hatred, for lack of a better word, but saltiness really has to do with that second ability, which is the ability that kind of stacks or inhibits your playstyle. So for Vorinclex, I don't think people are so concerned with the mana doubling. Now, that's a super powerful ability, but people are more concerned with the fact that it slows down my land and prohibits my ability to untap.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the first ability on each of the Praetors is actually not super like cost effective. Like, if you're paying 8 mana to double your lands, there's way
Mhm.
cheaper ways that you can do that. It's the combination of that and the second ability that makes it a very cost efficient way to shut off your opponent's board and boost your own board to the next level.
Yeah, which is, and that's very true because if we look at so the topmost ones that were the most disliked, I mean, Vorinclex doubles your mana is his. I guess let's say like the pro and con of it, right? Or the pro for you and the con for your opponent. The Vorinclex doubles your mana, super powerful. I'm not overly concerned. Well, I guess depending on the deck, I might be overly concerned if my opponents doubled their mana. Jin the original one, the Core Augur. Yeah, you draw 7 cards at your end step, but I know that you're about to also enter like the discard phase of that. So you're just kind of cherry picking your hand, but it's not in and of itself like impossible to beat. Elish Norn +2/+2 to all your creatures. Again, there's how many creatures out there that go, okay, I'm gonna give all your zombies +1/+1, or all your humans +1/+1. So just having like a better anthem effect is not unworkaroundable. It's really the negative downside that I think turns a lot of people off.
I would agree. A similar, I mean, on a note though, it's rare to see these as commanders. I haven't ever played against anybody, really busting out a Jin Cataxis deck because it kind of
Mhm.
paints you as a target really early into the game. Like if everybody knows that as soon as you get 10 mana, you're going to start reducing their hand size by 7. They're going to either focus you down and try to kill you, or they're going to hold up their removal for the end step before your turn when you flash in Jin Cataxis, only for him to get Beast with End on your upkeep. So,
Yeah, I think. Yeah, now I personally, I can't say that I've actually run into anyone running these commanders in my day to day life. I will say I agree. I don't think a lot of them are commander focused, like as far as being the commander. I think that might change a little bit with Shieldred the Apocalypse, the one that's like whenever you draw, you gain life and other people lose life.
absolutely.
But even that, I mean, as far as on the salty scale, that's a lower to me. That's a lower ranking ability. It kind of showed because Shieldred, I want to say was like maybe 20th most salty commander, but it did not go anywhere near what Vorinclex and Jin Cataxius did, which are basically inhibiting people from playing the game.
Well, in a similar boat to the Praetors, there is another group of creatures that receive a lot of maybe unnecessary, but maybe necessary salt, and that is the Eldrazi.
Mhm.
These are going to be your Ulamogs, your Emrakuls, your Kozileks, your huge mana cost creatures that come in, have an effect. They're going to
Mhm.
shuffle into your graveyard, and then they're going to annihilate 4 permanents every time they attack. These are creatures that I think kind of go into that same boat. Or that it's rare to see them at the helm of a deck. They're more all stars of salt in the 99. Building up to 11 mana and casting it out of the blue feels a lot better, I think, because it's such a great boss monster. But it doesn't paint you as a huge target. Um, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts
I
on the
think
Eldrazi, Corey?
I think you're absolutely right, which is the odds of you running across like an Ulamog in the command zone probably not high, but I would say the odds of you running across like a Yuriko deck that has Ulamog in its deck so it can flash it, hit everybody for 11 damage, and then put it in its hand, probably a lot higher. Or having things that are like mana reducers and then, cheating it out and not paying 11 mana out of the 99, a lot higher. Um, for this though, I think let's be honest. I don't think a lot of people are concerned about 11 mana for a 10/10 or 13 mana for a 13/13. It pretty much sums itself up to the Annihilator trigger.
Yeah, and nobody wants their to have to sacrifice 4 permanents. And like, if you're playing a deck like this, you're often your goal is to pump out, a million fast mana rocks and get out your Ulamog as soon as possible. Ancient Tomb into a mana
Mm.
crypt, into a manifold, and then soon you have no cards in hand, which can kind of like cut itself off. But also, if you are casting a Ulamog on turn, 4 or 5, and you're swinging in with that Annihilator 4 is really going to punish somebody who hasn't had the chance to, play low CMC permanents, because now they're having to sacrifice their lands, and it just takes people out of the game. And on top of that, it's indestructible, so it's going to be difficult to get rid of unless you're playing a deck that has access to exile-based removal.
Yeah, no, I will say I think with Commander Masters back in August when they had, was it Zuladoc or Zuladuke, the Eldrazi precon?
Google Doc.
Yeah, Google Docs. I think that might lead to you seeing some more of these, but again, they're not going to be in the command zone. That would be, you cast one spell and then maybe you cascade into, an Emrakul or something. Like you play Emrakul and you cascade into Ulamog or something like that. Um, but yeah, I don't think you're going to see them as much. I do fully understand why they're high up on the salty level of things. Um, but it's sort of like, do I want to deal with one big boss monster that I could destroy or I could get around? Or do I want to deal with something that's going to perpetually hinder my game continuously? And I think I would rather have to deal with, an Ulamog entering the battlefield, destroying a target permanent, and then maybe it has its Annihilator trigger at some point over the Praetors that are just inhibiting me from playing my game.
I think that's a good point. These are definitely salty creatures, but I'm a little surprised to see them so high up on the list, just because of the lack of presence in the my local meta or my meta over the last several years. It's rare to see them. Sometimes one will be in a deck to prevent your deck from being milled away, but
Mm.
often they're more of a I love to see a good Eldrazi, like late game, slam it down. Let's see it. Let's have it. Let's take it home.
Yeah, I think it hits the crater hoof itch, which is, hey, look, late game's got to end somehow. Oh, go ahead, slam it down. You worked for this. This is your crescendo of the deck. Yeah, go ahead and play your 13 mana Emrakul. Good on you. But at that point, I think everybody's so developed into the late game that, I mean, I'm not like, oh no, they played Emrakul. Now I've got to spend the next 10 turns fighting off Emrakul. Like, yeah, we're probably at the end. um,
Um,
looking at, oh, so going from just, I think, generically salty, let's look at some things that we both agree are a little more specifically salty and also ranked high for you guys. And we're gonna play a little game as we do this. So I have taken the liberty, Cole. I did not tell you this, but I've taken the liberty of polling a couple other creators out there, and we're gonna play a game as we do this of kill on sight or it's all right. So we're gonna look at these commanders, talk about why they're salty, talk about, how we feel about them, the play patterns, stuff like that, and then you're gonna determine if this is a commander that should just be burned to the ground, or if it's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be, and we're going to see if the population agrees with you. So first up, our very first commander we're going to hop into, we've got Turgrid, God of Fright. So Turgrid, for those of you guys who don't know, came out of Kaldheim. It's 3 black black for a legendary creature god with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now that's one side. On the back side, you have Turgrid's Lantern, which for 3 and a black you get a legendary artifact that is tap. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Then for 3 and a black, you can untap the Lantern.
Yeah, I don't even know if you need to describe the back half of that card. It might as well be a one-sided card because I don't think anybody's ever playing it as a lantern. If you're seeing Turgrid, it's the face card, and man, is that a salty commander.
You know
Just
what's
in,
weird?
huh?
So you say don't use the back half, right? And I've always had that same mentality, which is, look, they put a back half on here. They kind of like they did with what's the other one, Bergie, the mono red one that gives you like red mana when you cast spells.
Yeah, and then the Horn of Harnfell that allows you to discard cards to impulse draw.
Yeah, it's like, all right, there's a back half on these. Are you going to see it? Probably not, right? So I didn't even remember what the back half of Turgrid does until I was looking it up to put like images in our show notes here so we could reference it. It's Torment of Hailfire. It's a Torment of Hailfire. The front half is so good that you don't even look at the back half.
With enough mana, you could definitely, if you have infinite mana, it's a win con. The lantern is a win con. But for the most part, when you're playing a trigger deck, you're getting everything discarded out of your hand. All of your creatures are being forced to be sacrificed, and it's like, oh wow, I loved having nothing on the field, and you have all my stuff now.
Yeah, it's like what? Oh my god, I don't know why I'm blanking right now. What is the black resurrection spell, like black reanimer spell that reanimates everyone's graveyard?
Living
Uh,
Death. It's
Is it
everybody
Living Death?
sacrifices each of their oh well there's Rise of the Dark Realms which resurrects
That's what I'm
all,
thinking of.
yeah, but Living Death is kind of an interesting one because each player sacrifices all of the creatures they
And
control.
exiles their graveyard.
Yeah, so you do get a lot of the stuff that they sacrifice.
I was just thinking of Rise of the Dead or the Dark Realms because it's
Hmm.
like, do I want Rise of the Dark Realms on the front or do I want Torment of Hailfire on the back? Like as a slightly like downgraded version of each one.
Yeah, I if we're talking about hated commanders, I think this is a big one. I would almost promise you that it's going to be kill on sight unless you're the person playing it.
I will say when I first got into Commander was like maybe a little before Kaldheim. This was one of the first commanders I saw and thought about building because every every commander player, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think every commander player goes on this journey of like, okay, I'm learning how to play, and the next deck I want to build is going to be the spite deck to ruin my pod. Then
Absolutely.
I want then so everybody's like the first deck they look at is like I want to build this spite control deck that's going to grind everyone to dust, and then they go I want to build something that's like big stompy, big mana, and then they kind of balance back into whatever their long term play style of enjoyment is.
I famously built a Krinko, the mob boss, deck that was hyper optimized around tapping and untapping him, so that I could bring it to my college play group and whoop their ass. So
Just have huge armies of goblins.
yes, yes.
My first, so the two that I first looked at, I got into what was it? Commander's Quarters is like the first YouTube channel I started watching,
Uh huh.
and it was Turgrid, it was Derevi, like the Imperial Tactician.
And I believe Derevi is a little bit further down on our list, huh?
We will be talking about Derevi here in a bit. But those were the first two where I was like, I could play this and just control the board, become the arch enemy. This sounds fantastic. And then I never ended up building them. And thankfully, but yeah, so Turgrid, let's get back on Turgrid. So Turgrid is definitely a rough game to play against. So what does a Turgrid play pattern typically look like?
You want to, get her out and then resurrect or slam down a it that betrays, and well, she already is an it that betrays, really, but grave pact, anything that's going to
Mhm.
make your opponents sacrifice their creatures or discard their hand. Maybe you have a waste knot out that's going to get you other benefits from discarding. You're going to see a lot of those spells that focus on hand control and keeping people's hands empty so that your board can be full.
A lot of You're absolutely right. I think the sacrifice thing does exist for your big packs, your dictated Ereboses and stuff like that. But I think this is definitely a discard commander. Like, all right, let me get as much of this, many cards as are going to force my opponents to discard their hand as possible. Thankfully, this isn't in Grixis colors where we got to look at Wheel of Fortune or anything like that.
Yeah, you're a little bit more limited, but you're not, you're not strapped for tools in that
Hmm.
department.
Um, so you see somebody play a Turgid against you. What are we our goal
Eh,
here?
I'm saying kill on sight.
You think so?
Yes,
Okay.
locking in.
Locking in kill on site. All right. So for Turgrid, I've got a good quote here. Uh, so not only is Turgrid the god of salt, but it salts all the land it touches. You should take up all playmats that card is played upon and burn them in your backyard. It is a kill on site commander.
Well, yeah, raise the fields that she was.
Salt the earth is what you got to do. Yeah, I 100% agree. Kill it. Um, do you let people? Let me ask you this: we've talked before about how you're pretty open to playing at least once against any deck. If somebody were to walk up to you and ask if they could play Turgrid, are you down for that game, or is that a game you're trying to avoid?
Oh well, I'll play it as long as I'll play it. I'll play against it. I'm happy to play against it as long as it's not like a complete drag. Like kill me with the stuff that you're taking from me, or eat several removal spells and you're out of the game. I'm not worried about playing against a Turgrid, but I am gonna be salty at the end of that game if all of my stuff gets taken and it lasts 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah, I will say I think you're absolutely right about the he eats a lot of removal. So if you are the Turgid player, maybe don't play this right on turn 5. You need to set up your board a little bit, have those sacrifice outlets, have some kind of protection, something like that, because if you play Turgid turn 5 and wait a full turn rotation before you can do anything, if it didn't get removed, it's because people don't have removal. That's about the gist of it.
Exactly.
Now if you do want to play Turgid, but you don't want to be as loathed at the table, there are some alternative commanders I think you could play that we don't get hated upon them as much. Like one I can think of off the top of my head, and Cole, you actually have this as commander, is Liliana.
Yes, Liliana the Heretical Healer. She's a baby called Baby Liliana because she starts as a human or she starts as a creature and you can flip her into a planeswalker on the backside. And famously, whenever I play this deck, which is one of my favorite decks, you kind of have to explain that her ultimate ability as a planeswalker is game-breakingly strong, and that I have to encourage you to not let me get the ult off. Do whatever you can to prevent the ult from going off because it just makes for unfun gameplay. But her -8, and she starts at 3 loyalty. Her -8 is you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So if you can manage to squeeze out this ability, which takes a couple of hoops because you have to have enough blockers, you have to have ways to protect from removal. It's not going to be every game, uh, but you get a similar to Turgrid style effect where you're bringing people's stuff to your field, and it's just as consistent. And it's once you get that emblem, it's not going away. So you're pretty much set up for the rest of the game.
I like this a lot because it's Turgid esque in that it's reanimating, it's making people discard cards, stuff like that, but it's not as hey, it hit the battlefield trying to take over the game. Like you do have some time to build up to it. Also, the fact that it's a planeswalker, a lot of people don't assess it as much as of a threat. I would argue.
Sometimes. I mean, again, they read the -8, and it's like you're pretty much guaranteed that she's going to get beaten down. I run her as the head of my Liliana tribal deck. It has like as many Liliana planeswalkers that are reasonably good, and then a ton of other fun mono black tools. But I find that the ult is very rare. If you've gotten the ult off, it's because you're either dominating the game that hard, and you're probably going to win anyways, or your opponents are just you know not playing enough creatures to get through a wall of tokens.
Yeah, and I mean the other two abilities on Liliana are decent, but they're not as oppressive as Turgrid's one ability. It has +2 for everyone to discard a card. I mean, you're also discarding a card, and they have a choice of which cards they're discarding. Um, it's decent, but it's not game ending. And then the -X to reanimate something from your graveyard. Again, it's cool. There's a lot of other black reanimator spells out there that exist. Um, and it's only your graveyard, and you're paying proportional value of loyalty counters.
Unless you have
So
a
I don't
way
think
to
it's
abuse like a Yawgmoth Thran Physician and proliferate up to 8, it's rare that you're going to pop this ability off.
yeah. I mean, listen, there's a way to break pretty much every commander that exists out there. I would say this one, yeah, is more tame. Like you're not going to be as put out by your pod as if you drop Turgor down.
Absolutely. Another good kind of alternative to Turgid, if you're interested, is going to be 6 mana for Geth, Lord of the Vault. Has Intimidate. It's a zombie, and you can pay X and a black to put a artifact or a creature card with X as its CMC from any opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped, and then that player mills X cards. That's an instant speed ability, so you can kind of pull some fun shenanigans off, mitigating the comes under your control tapped part of that ability. But you're getting things from your opponents. You're milling them, so you're filling the graveyards. Everybody gets to keep the stuff that's in their hand. They get to keep the stuff that's on their board until it's in their graveyard. And I think that kind of is a fun way to neuter Turgrid as well.
And this one also lets you get artifacts, whereas Liliana is creature based.
Mm-hmm.
Turgid, it should be noted, is permanents, non-token permanents. So you could force them to get rid of land or enchantments or anything like that. You could snag all that stuff as well.
Yeah,
You're
there's
also limiting.
a lot of effects you wouldn't really think about that involve sacrificing your permanents, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't. Sterling Grove being one of them, or things like Sakura Tribe Elder, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't even think about that, or God forbid a some of your fetch lands, or even in Evolving
Mhm.
Wilds, like you're just gonna ramp the Turgid player.
Yeah, you'll get a land, but so are they. So it kind of is all a push. So yes, Turgrid on site. I think. By the way, Turgrid. I want you to guess real quick because Turgrid is what I think is synonymous with Salty Commander. Where do you think Turgrid fell in EDH Rec Salty Commander list?
Now is the list strictly legendary creatures, or is it all like is it
Uh,
just salty cards?
Salty cards. So really, the number one card on this entire list was Stasis.
Uh-huh.
It was Stasis, Vorinclex, and then Winter Orb, if I recall. But just out of commanders, if you had to just, what do you think? Top 10, top 20, top 50?
Well, on a scale, or on a base of just the commanders, I would say probably like number 7 or 8. But in terms of
Okay.
like salty cards, I would imagine it's probably in like the 20s, like mid low to mid 20s.
So it was like 12 to 15. I don't recall the exact number, but it was 12 to 15 on commanders.
Okay.
Um, it pretty much fell behind like every copy of the Eldrazi and the Praetors, the non-Urabrask, non-Saga Praetors.
Well, yeah, I'm not surprised to see it that high up on the list. It is a salty card.
But speaking of other salty ones, let's talk removal because we've got a couple salty ones here. So when we look at Turgrid, Turgrid's salty because takes your stuff and it limits your ability to play with things because it's making you sacrifice or discard your hand. Now we're going to talk about a couple commanders that are straight up like removal based or board wiping, stuff like that. So first up, we've got Baral, Chief of Compliance, who is a famously oppressive, famously blue commander to play. So Baral is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 human wizard. Since the sorceries you cast are 1 less, and whenever you cast a spell or ability you control that counters a spell, you can draw a card, and then you discard a card.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
it's a salty card. It's encouraging you to just build your deck with 30 to 40 counter spells and play, and then a Talrand the Sky Summoner, so you have a bit of a payoff, and just
Mhm.
slam them out, countering left and right. Every spell that's deemed mildly inconvenient. It can create kind of a salty play environment for your friends because they're trying to cast, their spells, and just anytime you have any mana up, it has to be assumed that you're likely going to cast a 2 mana spell for 1 mana and then draw another card, and it's probably a counter spell.
Yeah, like let's be honest. We talk about how annoying the whole pay the one is. Like, do you pay the one? Do you pay the one? Do you pay the one? This is going to be every time you cast a spell, we're going to remind you, I've got 2 blue up, I've got 2 blue up, 2
Let
blue
me think
mana.
about that. I don't know. Let me just
Does it resolve?
yeah, yeah. It's
Does it resolve?
extremely
Anyone
tedious.
answers? Like Cole will cast a spell. And let's say Cole casts a spell, and I'm the 4th person in turn order with my Baral out. I'm going to go to the 2nd person. Do you have a response? No. 3rd person. Do you have a response? No. Okay. I'm going to cast Mana Drain. Does it resolve? Does it resolve? Like, you're just going to hear that over and over and over again. So, your typical Baral deck is Baral, all ran for the win con. I would say what? Archmage Emeritus for draw, and then like 40 counterspells.
It's a nobody a well-timed counterspell can be like so fun and so game changing and so so cool and really makes you think about how you're going to play the game. But then when you're playing up against a Baral Chief of Compliance, and they might even be playing the the free counterspells, your Force of Wills, your Pact
Mhm.
of Negations, that sort of thing.
Yeah, your fierce
Sure,
guardianships.
fierce guardianship. It starts to feel a little bit pointless. Every how do you know any of your spells are going to resolve when they got a full grip?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would say. So I would say this is more of like an inconvenient commander because I would argue it does have some issues closing out the game. A lot of the other cards have win cons stapled to them. This one, you just have to play a lot of like blue good stuff to win. But it definitely elongates games.
In a similar sphere to that is the Child of Alara. Now this is Wooburg for a legendary avatar. It's a 6/6 with trample, and it has a tiny, pretty relevant ability here that says whenever Child of Alara dies, destroy all non-land permanents. They can't be regenerated. So I want you to picture this, Corey. You're,
Mhm.
playing your deck. You're having a fun time. Then
Uh,
I
I've
build
got
up.
my brawl out.
Sure. You're playing your Baral, but you're tapped out, and your Force of Will, I've used as a nacho to serve
Sure.
guacamole onto my plate because I'm so
I
tired
was
of getting
feeling
free counterspelled.
I was feeling cocky, so I force a wheeled your opt. Got it.
Sure.
I'm there. I'm there.
Well, I'm playing Child of Alara. I slam her down, and I have some way to give all of my permanents indestructible, which is pretty
Yeah.
easy to do in
Mhm.
Wooburg. You're not really
Yeah, when
restricted
you're
by color. Uh,
mhm.
and I'm gonna set your board back to 0, and my board stays, perfectly fine. Now, next turn, I'm gonna do the exact same thing. The turn following that, I'm gonna do the exact same thing, and the turn following that, I'm gonna just keep, this is a pattern that keeps building on itself of board wiping. My board continues to grow, and yours stays at 0 all game.
Mhm. this is your you're right. In Wooburg, I mean, you kill Child of Alara, and you go, whoops, I also put Teferi's Protection out there. Or, whoops, I put Heroic Intervention out there. Or, there's so many
Unbreakable
ways.
formation out there. There's a billion.
Uh-huh. And there's a billion, and they're all in the, like, 3 to 4 or 5 mana range. It, man, yeah, you're absolutely right. You just keep bringing everybody down to ground zero, starting from fresh, and then you be like, all right, well, on my end step, all my stuff returns, or at the beginning of my turn, all my stuff returns.
It's cheeky a couple times, but these two commanders, Brawl and Child of Alara, kind of, anything that's going to be tons of removal on a stick is going to induce salt just by sitting down at the table, because it's like, unless you're really fond of those 4 to 5 hour games where you can't get anything done, it's a slugfest, and I don't want to be any part of that.
I will say, there's one Child of Alara esque commander that I really enjoy, that I've played on Arena before,
Is that
which is Serulf, World Ender.
interesting?
Um, so that one is a Bulgari commander, so green black, and then you put when permanents die, you put counters on it. And then you can remove all the counters to destroy anything that has that mana value or less, except for Serulf.
It's a very similar, board wipe tribal in that sense.
Yeah, now there are a couple like hoops to jump through, so you can only do that effect on at the beginning of your upkeep. So if it gets removed, there's nothing like Child of Alara where, hey, it just dies. This Child of Alara, you could even argue if somebody wanted to exile it, go, no, I've got a sack outlet on my land. I've got an Ashiok's altar or an Ashnod's altar or something like that, and you just go, response to you exiling, I sack it. It's dead. Haha.
Right.
Yeah, these are definitely salty. I think Baral is maybe a little easier to choke down than Child of Alara.
I would agree with that, but even then, it's hard pressed.
The other problem is with Baral. We talked about this. Baral reappears every set. There's like every 2 sets. They're like, Baral hasn't been reprinted to the ground yet. Let's bring it back.
Yeah, he's pretty popular in the reprint category. I'm looking at it, and he has like about 11 different printings, maybe only 10. One of them is an art card, and a couple of them are, like he has uh no a serialized, printing
Oh
in
yeah, the
multiverse
multiverse.
legends. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, overall no fun. I do have a
Right.
commander that I think is a little worse, and that's removal in the form of player removal.
A little worse, as in like a little less fun, or a little worse, as in like it just is not as good as Brawl, because Brawl can't be bested.
That's a great point. I do think that this is probably a better deck than Baral. I think it has more viable ways to end the game, but it is
Mhm.
definitely, I would argue, saltier. And I'd much rather be in a play group of 3 Barals than even just one of these Beamtown Bullies. This is
Hmm.
one and Jund for Vigilance, Haste, Ogre Devil Warrior that you can tap and put a creature from your graveyard onto the battlefield under a target opponent's control. It's goaded and it has haste, and it gets exiled at the end step. Now, if you look on EDH Rec, you're going to be pretty convinced that this is the worst deck ever. You have to remember that
Yeah.
these cards aren't coming down on your field. They're getting either milled or discarded, faithless looting style effects into your graveyard, and then pumped out onto your opponent's battlefield. And these are cards like Leveler, which when it comes into play, it removes your entire library from the game. That's old school talk for exile. So that basically effectively puts you at death on your next draw step. or things like Eater of Days, which is going to come into play and make that opponent skip their next 2 turns. And then things like World Gorger Dragon, that when it comes into play, it's going to exile all other permanents you control, leaving you with a completely, or pretty much empty board other than a 7/7 flying trample dragon that you have no inherent way to kill yourself. Because all of your, lands are gone, all of your artifacts are gone.
Hmm.
And the list goes on and on and on, Corey. I could read you the descriptions about 20 more creatures that would make you throw up in your mouth a little bit, but you're going to see them all
Yeah.
when you play against the Beamtown Bullies.
Yeah, I think you're right, which is if you look at this deck, if you look at a deck list from this, you're like, it's nothing but the absolute worst of the worst creatures to have on your side. There's a lot of when this attacks, half your life, stuff like that. And it's important to realize that those should not be on your side of the field at any point in this game. Um I think this is a obnoxious card when it happens to you, but I would argue, 'cause I know this is one you felt strongly about. I would argue it's mitigated by the fact that the stuff is exiled. So really you're trying to find things that are like ETB, like terrible ETB triggers.
Eh,
Um
Well, so
now
some of these will just downright, they'll
Jew.
they'll end your game on the spot. Like usually that one turn or that one ETB is all you need. Like a Phage the Untouchable, that just
Mhm.
auto ends the game. I mean, there's I don't know why
Yeah.
anybody would want to play against this more than a couple times. It's cool to see the gimmick, but in practice, it's either going to just remove somebody from the game instantly, and then if nobody can take you out, you're just next turn you do the same thing. The follow, it draws a lot of hate. I'm gonna if I have nobody else to swing my my Llanowar elves on turn 2 at, it's gonna be the Beamtown Bullies player.
That's absolutely true. And I think in a way this is almost worse than some of the other Salties things we've talked about because this was the backup commander in one of the precons, so it's pretty out there, like as far as printing and accessibility.
So we do have a couple of alternatives. If you're into this idea of bad gifts, giving away things that are utterly game changing, there are a couple other commanders that, honestly, they can do the exact same thing. It just depends on what you do with it. But things like Zedru the Great Hearted, which allows you to donate permanents that you control, so you do have to actually play them, which is going to limit your pool of god awful creatures. Or even something like John Irenicus, the Shattered One, who is going to, again, give opponents control of creatures you control. So you can't, it just limits your access to these tempting but unnecessarily evil creatures like the Leveler or like the Eater of Days.
Yeah, so for me, I like the John Arenicus version. For a couple reasons. Like, so John Arenicus gives creatures off of your board.
Hmm.
So typically you don't set yourself up with things that have like terrible ETB effects. You set yourself up with things that either have like attack triggers because they're goaded or have like these horrible static abilities like as long as this sits out here, you can't win the game and your opponents can't lose the game. Or as
Right.
long as this sits out here, you can't draw cards or things like that. And it's like a weird like gifts you don't want meets stacks kind of deck.
The interesting thing about John Irenicus is that those creatures are goaded, they can't be sacrificed, and they stay on the battlefield for the rest of the game. So eventually, when when the person you've donated these gifts to starts killing off your other opponents, that goad is going to wear off, and they're going to have to start swinging those creatures at you. So unless you have something like a homeward path or some way to gain your creatures back, you're going to be facing the very same threats that you're dispensing.
Oh, now, I'll say also, John Arenicus comes with one line of text that everybody forgets about. It's I think also makes it a little better, which is whenever those creatures attack. So as long as it's a creature you own but you don't control attacks, you draw a card. So you're also getting some card draw off of it, which will hopefully help you find those answers for when you're stuck in a one-on-one situation.
Right.
Um, yeah, but I think these are like softer, do similar things, but they're softer than Beamtown Bullies because Beamtown Bullies definitely hit you with things like Leveler to level you,
Hmm.
whereas John Arenicus or Zedru kind of gives you just like annoying pieces.
Right. It's so again, it just is limiting your access to these tempting creatures that are just a source of uncontested salt.
Yeah. And then depending on what playstyle you want, look at your alternatives. Like Zedru is like a life gain bit as well. Blim the comedic genius, which is another option, is in Rakdos, and that one that's its win con, so it gives stuff away, and then people lose life and discard cards equal to the amount of things they control that but don't own. So you kind of like pass things around and drain people life. Renicus is more of a goad, set yourself up for the end game kind of setup. I would say none of them are like as Beamtown Bully oppressive, which is I tap and I just shatter your world.
Right.
So Beamtown Bullies, you said you would sit through four brawls. If you sat down and your pod was Beamtown Bullies, John Arenicus, and Zedru the Great Hearted, and then you, how are you feeling about that game?
I've already conceded, and I'm actually ordering a Sprite at the counter. I don't have any reason to be in a game where everybody is so hateful.
Everyone plays with everyone else's deck, basically.
No, I'm just kidding around. I would likely convince everybody to target down the Beamtown Bullies player, and I think the combination of a Zedru, John Irenicus, and Blim, no, that might just end up being a fun game.
Okay, so where do you stand on the burn it, save it? Like, is this a kill on sight or it's all right for Beamtown Bullies?
For me, you're gonna have to lock me in a kill on site.
I was looking at this. I think it's kill on sight if you build it the most aggressive fashion. I think there's like also ink builds of this that are just funny.
Yeah, Beamtown
Um,
Bullies, but the creatures are good. Like that would be fun.
or we were talking about, I can't remember its name, but there's that mono red one that enters the battlefield and it lets your three opponents tutor for a creature.
Yes, do remember. It's some sort of awful, staple, but it does allow for a little bit of a fun, mechanic.
Yeah, so
Everybody else getting to search something out.
there's stuff like that where it's maybe it sucks for you, but it's not as oppressive for the table. Um, However, I will say I was proven wrong because overwhelmingly, the responses I got back on this were kill it on site, and a lot of, I'll paraphrase, but a lot of like don't give me none of that crap.
I'm glad that, that people have come to their senses about how awful this card is.
Now, personally, like I said, I could take it or leave it, but I do think you have one bad experience with this, and you're wary of that commander perpetuity. Um, Now let's move on. So, if Turgid is the god of salt, this is like king of salt,
I think that's a
and
safe assessment.
which is weird because it's something that you kill with salt. It also
Ooh.
is now killing you with salt, and that is Toxtril the Corrosive, a 5 black for a slug horror right out of Innistrad. It's a 7/7 with 4 lines of text. Uh, First one, at the beginning of each instep, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Really tame. No one cares. Second one, creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on him. Well, there's a problem. Third one, whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token. That's obnoxious. And blue black, sacrifice a slug, draw a card, and the circle is complete.
Yeah, each of these abilities is more relevant than the previous one, and this card is something that I could talk a lot about. I would argue my least favorite and saltiest commander, and I am talking to you, Devin. I got a buddy who runs this, but basically, you're trying to ramp out as quickly as you can into this slug and just take over the game. He by himself will practically get you through your whole deck. He'll continuously wipe your opponent's boards, and he'll build you a board by making you the 1/1 black slugs. It is just utterly confusing to play against this when you're playing creatures and they have different numbers of slime counters. It can be and
Mm.
you're now removing Toxrill or bringing it back. It could just be a bit of a hard time to maintain, and it's very salty to play against because unless you're playing something with 5 power or 5 toughness or more, your creature's going to be dead by the time it comes back around to you. It is a
Yeah,
brutal card.
I think there's also people underestimate the like mental math you have to do with the counters because it seems like okay, if I've got a 1/1 creature and it gets the counter on it, it's dead, right? I can understand that. But what people don't account for, my experience, is I've got a 4/4 creature with 2 slime counters on it. So it's now a 2/2. And then I swing into combat and it gets blocked with a 1/1. All right, well, now its toughness is dropped down to 1, and then it gets another counter put on it, and now it's dead.
Overall, it's a card that does everything, and you might say, well, hey, it costs 7 mana. It's not going to come out until the end of the game. But the
Mhm.
unfortunate truth is that if you're playing a Toxrill deck, you've packed it with ways to ramp up. Which in black you're not entirely at a loss for. You have a lot of ways to generate a lot of mana, and then you're going to
Mhm.
hold on to a couple counter spells or ways to protect Toxrill from the only hope your opponents have, which is having removal and holding on to it for Toxrill's cast. So it
Yeah.
creates a unhealthy play pattern where the person who's playing Toxrill is either having Toxrill get removed, repeatedly, and they're not having a fun time because their commander costs 13 mana, or everybody else is not having a fun time, and the Toxrill player is sliming around in their slug ooze and loving it.
Yeah, like don't think this is going to be a turn 7 play. This is definitely a hey, I've got Cabal Coffers or I've got Dark Ritual or any of those kind of things where it's going to probably come out 2 to 3 turns earlier than you suspect. Um
Right.
Also, it looks like just a tiny little pip on the corner of the card, but don't forget this is also in blue. So if they play Toxrill out and they're holding up blue mana, it's probably because they're holding that counter spell to block you from destroying it.
Yeah, I've
So,
had some negative
so
experiences against this card.
yeah, and I can see why, because you're putting out counters, you're weakening the toughest stuff, but even like if I'm building this, I'm building a polymorph kind of deck, I think. You play a lot of like mass diminishes and stuff like that, turning everybody else's stuff into 1/1s until end of turn, and they're gonna get all the counters on them. They're gonna destroy. Suddenly, I've got 10, 15 slugs, and if I need to replenish my hand, I can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, you sound like a real gentleman, Corey.
it's a I think one of the newer, more obnoxious commanders. Um, if you want to play something like this, and because I get the appeal in that it's like -1, -1, we do have a couple alternative options. I think might be a little more enjoyable, or at least a little less hated.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of like Silumgar, which is also in blue black, so you get the same kind of almost the same deck if you really wanted to. But it's a 3/7 dragon. It's got hexproof flying, of course. And then you're building a dragon deck. So whenever a dragon you control attacks, It gives all the creatures for that defending player -1/-1, so you can kind of get around the overall board hatred of Toxrill by going, all right, I'm only going to attack one person. Maybe you attack them with 2 to 3 dragons, so all their stuff gets -3/-3, but you're kind of targeting it on one or two people that you might deem as the problem, as opposed to just I'm blanket hating the entire board.
Right, which I think makes for a much healthier game experience. And hey, Dimir dragons is like that's pretty unique. You don't see a lot of Dimir dragon decks, so anything that gets you away from the slug and into an alternative is fine by me.
Mhm. I think you could also make an argument for the Scorpion God, which is the lesser of the three, or the less seen of the three gods.
Hmm.
Um, but that one also does like -1/-1 counters. You're just paying mana for it. But so where Silmgar gives you like the slugs and you trade off slugs for card draw, this one you can just straight up pay mana to put counters on other creatures, and then when they die, draw a card. You can do shenanigans even where if a creature's about to die anyways, you just pay 3 mana to throw a counter on it. And you kind of pay 3 mana to draw the card anyways. And then of course it comes with that classic line of text, which is when it dies, put it to your hand.
Absolutely. I agree with you earlier. It is definitely one of the low like underestimated Amonkhet gods, but it's really cool and it refills your hand. You can pay 3 mana for a bit of targeted removal, and you're in Rakdos, so you're not, you got some cool toys to play around with there with neg 1 counter support. Things like
Uh,
Yawgmoth, that sort of thing.
and you can also do like neg 1 counters and then have burn spells and stuff like that to kind of like the nail in the coffin.
Sure.
But yeah, I think these two they both do like similar things to Toxrill, but they're not as universally hated. And ironically, they're both cheaper in mana, so might actually end up getting them out faster if you really put your mind to it.
Well, I'm curious, Corey. I mean, I don't even think we need to do the game here, but this has got to be a kill on sight, Commander. Is that right?
Actually, it's everybody loved Toxrill. They said no, yeah, it's so of all of them, and this might spoil it for a couple future ones. There were three that got like universally hated. I mean, like other ones were somewhat of a mixed bag. Some people said, "Oh, you know what? I can live, or I could take it or leave it." There were three that were just like loathed into the ground, and it was Toxrill, it was Turgrid, and then it was one other one that we haven't touched upon yet. Um, yeah, Toxrill by far was like, get it out of my face, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to hear what the last one is because that is a group of some salty cards right there. Turgrid, Toxrill, and hopefully it's another T champion. The 3 T's of salt.
It's Static no. um, Next one we're going to look at, and I am very curious because you went on record a couple episodes ago defending this one. But it comes also with a like let's play with other people's stuff caveat, and that's Sin triplets. So for 2 and Esper, you're gonna get an artifact creature. So you get a little artifact play in here. Human wizard. It's a 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, you choose target opponent. This turn, that player can't cast spells or activate abilities, and plays with their hand revealed. May play lands and cast spells from that player's hand this turn. So you see their hand, play from their hand. Um, I think this one I will say popped up on EDH Rec pretty highly on this salty list.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's got a reputation and a history for being salty. But you went on record saying we should take the hit off of the Sin triplets. So what's going on? You disagree?
Yes, I'm a man of culture. I love a good Esper deck. And
Okay.
I think that there is room for the Sin triplets to kind of come back. I know that, several years ago it was a huge boogeyman, and admittedly, if you are falling behind and finally get that ramp spell, you just need to wait one more turn to cast it, and then the Sun triplet selects you, and they're going to take your Sky Shroud claim, or they're going to take your cultivate. That is a feels bad moment. But I think in general, it is in a well established play group. It is kind of fun to have the knowledge of, like, I know what's in your deck, Corey, so I am going to choose you and take a look at your hand and pluck out the things that I need from it.
Hmm.
You're in Esper, so you have fun cards like Fractured Identity that exiles a target permanent, and each other player who doesn't control that permanent makes a copy of it. There's a lot of like gimmicks you can do to offset the saltiness of the Send triplets while still allowing yourself to have a fun time.
So where do you think this stands if we're talking about like playing with other people's stuff? So Beantown Bullies is about making other people play with your stuff that they don't
Right.
want. This is about you playing with other people's stuff and they don't like it. What do you think? I mean, what do you think is like more, I guess, psychologically worse, or what do you think is more disliked?
Now, I would definitely have to say that I mean, that's actually a super tough question, because I think the Beamtown Bullies, like, getting insta killed with a gimmicky 10 mana creature, that to me is 100% worse
Mm,
than getting stuff taken out of your hand. But I know
sure.
that the public might feel differently in that, and that at least you can kind of control you can see what's in your opponent's graveyard, you can Bajuka Bog it, you can try to empty it out. But if somebody is looking at your hand every turn, they're going to be taking the best parts of it every turn, and it starts to get a little bit salt inducing, you could say.
Yeah, and I agree with that because I think people are more okay. Like people are more inclined for you to do shenanigans for your own stuff as long as you're not messing with their stuff. Like you could draw 100 cards if you wanted to, and people are not going to bat an eye in the same way as if you milled them a single card. But arguably, you drawing a bunch of cards is more powerful than you milling them any cards.
Absolutely. I think I mean I've also gone on record to say that I enjoy mill, but I think mill is another thing that just gets people angry
Mill's like
unnecessarily.
a mind game kind of thing too, right? Because the way you have to look at mill is, I think this is why mill is different than like per grid discard. So if you have stuff in your hand, you're planning on what to do with that stuff in your hand. You're like, all right, I got this in my hand. I'm going to go to my end step. I'm contemplating my next turn. I'm going to do this and this. So if I get that card, I'll pull this combo off. Stuff that you mill is a big question mark. Like those are not guaranteed resources
They
because
might as well have
even if
been
it's
on the bottom of your deck.
yeah, because even if it was at the top of your deck, I mean, you didn't know it was there unless you're like Sensei's Divining Top or Scroll Racking or something like that. And two, I mean, even if it is at the top, you could have had something or had somebody force you to shuffle your deck somehow. So it doesn't really matter. Um, you think this is less salt inducing than say a Turgrid?
Oh, most definitely. I think although similar in execution, it is
Mm,
vastly different than Turgrid, just based on the hoops that you have to jump through. Like, this is an older card; it's not letting you cast spells as though mana were any color. You have to get a way to convert your mana into the color that you need if it's a red or a green spell.
mm,
I think this is a card that is harder to set up. Uh, Although maybe, okay, so in a terms of individual, like, I might be more salty as an individual than a whole group
mm.
when I get send tripleted and all my shit gets stolen. But in a group playing against Turgrid, I think the general salt of all three people is greater than the single target of send triplets. So overall, I think Turgrid is a saltier deck.
I think so. For me, I think it comes down to like focus because the issue with a Turgrid or a box roll is that it's hitting the entire board. Like some people might argue, oh, but look, you're not really making it, not targeting someone, so you're not making them an enemy. No, you're making you the target and you the enemy. Like you're making yourself the arch enemy by blowing up three players' boards.
Right.
Um, Whereas I think, yeah, with Sin triplets or like we just talked about like Silumgar as a Tox roll alternative. If you're targeting a person, you can justify that by saying, okay, well, strategically, based off of the board set or based off their deck, this is why I picked that person.
I
I think
100% agree with you. Like,
I
oh,
think you
I
can
saw
like
them tutor.
politic it.
I know what's in their
Yeah.
hand, you know.
Mhm. And or you can even do it like, let's say you didn't necessarily want to cast anything for whatever reason. You could still just be like, all right, I'm gonna force you to reveal your hand, or I know that you're a Baral player that's got a bunch of counter spells. Well, I'm gonna pick you so that way you can't cast any counter spells this turn.
Absolutely.
So I think there's some options there. Now, if you don't like triplets, maybe you can't get over that hurdle. There are some other alternatives that you can look at that do like you play with other people's stuff, but maybe it's even less focused. Like if we'd say, okay, Turgrid blows up everything. We say send triplets looks at your entire hand, and there's things like Gonti that kind of randomize it to an extent.
Yeah, now like Gonti not only is taking, off the top of your opponent's library, so it's not taking from their hand. It kind of goes into that, it mill like you wouldn't really even see it if you didn't know that it was stolen from you, which with Gonti, the cards are exiled face down, so you're not even going to know that it's stolen from you until it's been cast. But
Hmm.
it's just kind of a way to meter out that effect in a more palatable manner. Like people are more likely to respond well when it's not being stolen from their hand or from their field, like with Turgrid or with Send triplets. Another great example of this is Aminatou, the Fate Shifter, which was a precon commander from several years ago. I think like 2018. It's the Planeswalker.
Hmm.
It's Esper, and you can ult it to swap control of everybody's boards with the player to their left or to their right. Based on your choice. And so that's kind of another one where it's like, okay, well, everybody sees it that it's on the field, it's going to happen. Everybody can kind of build around it, and everybody is affected by it. So it's
Hmm.
less salty because everyone's in the same bucket. They're all getting their stuff swapped around. It's maybe a bit more palatable than, like you said, getting targeted and hated out of the game on quickly, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that makes some of these more or less salty is like if you yourself are being targeted as the controller. So like Oxrill isn't really affecting you. Burgrid isn't really affecting you or your stuff. I mean, with Beamtown Bullies, you're not giving yourself this crappy, like Ender of Days or anything like that.
Right.
With Aminatou, I mean, you could look to your left and you could look to your right, and maybe they both have boards you don't necessarily want. But I think Aminatou is also a little interesting because that's the alt. So you could build around the shifting of things, but you could also build around the other abilities. Like I think the neg one is like a blink flicker kind of ability, which is
Right.
exiling permanents and then returning them. Um, you've got like draw a card, put a card from your hand, of hand selection. So there's like weird ways of building it. I think that you could get a Sin triplet like effect, but you could also get something that's like a whole different unique deck.
You're still playing around with other people's cards if that's what you want, and you're in the colors. You're playing Esper, so it's a pretty good alternative that's gonna maybe let you stay in the game a little bit longer. And Aminato has a huge number of relevant blink combos that can win you the game very quickly. So it is a powerful deck worthy of checking out if you're in the market for Esper stealing stuff deck.
I mean, you could also put John Arenicus in this in a Amanatu deck, and then just have Esper, stealing stuff, pushing bad things out of your deck to somebody else, and then shifting the board around a bunch.
Oh, this sounds like a delightful play
Uh,
experience.
the Russian roulette of play style.
Exactly.
But with that, guys, I think so. We've made it through. Whew, we've made it through all the ones that I think provide quote unquote unfair play style. Um, Next chunk we're gonna look at are restricting your play style, so to speak. So this chunk was a lot of like, oh, I don't like people messing with my stuff. I don't like people giving me things I don't want. This next one are going to be like pushed commanders and things that just be shut off the board a little bit. But before we hop into those, final thoughts, send triplets. It's all right. Kill it on sight.
Now I'm gonna think that this is our first. It's all right. But I know the haters are they're gonna claim it's KOS, but I don't think so.
Yeah, so general consensus was the same, which was it's all right. I think back in the day it was more of a boogeyman because there weren't things a lot more powerful than this. Now it's still a powerful effect, but it's been kind of power crept on by other commanders in recent years.
Right.
So I think it's fallen out of the salt radar. Um but with that, guys, we're gonna take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to look at what I think is probably the OG of salty commanders. So stay tuned for that. All right, guys, we are back. Thanks for hanging out with us through the break. So we are tackling salty commanders today. First half of the episode, we tackled things that made you feel attacked. Now we're gonna go and shift into things that make sure you're not attacking. I don't know if that's a good segue.
That's a good way to put it. These are going to
um,
tap down your resources. They're going to prevent you from playing the game in a different way than instantly dying. And this is going to slow down your game, but not to a halt.
Now, what we're gonna kick off on here is what I think. If somebody had to pinpoint or ask me to pinpoint the exact commander that be like originated the salty commander thought process, it would have to be Grand Arbiter Augustine the Fourth.
Mm,
Two white blue, a 2/3 human advisor. Only has 3 lines of text, but I think this is one of those things where it shows you that you don't have to have a ton of words to be, useful. It's white spells you cast cost 1 less, blue spells you cast cost 1 less, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more.
yeah, this is an iconic resource denial piece that is going to just speed up your game and make your opponent's game go a little bit slower. That
Mhm.
additional cost on each spell, it can add up. If you're trying to cast, 2 or 3 spells in a turn, that's going to stop you from doing that. Meanwhile, your Azorius spells that you're casting as the Grand Arbiter player are going to cost 2 less, and white and blue spells, of their respective colors, are going to cost 1 less each. So you're going to be casting. If you were going to be casting 2 to 3, you're maybe casting 3 to 4, where your opponents are now casting 1 to 2. So it's not as crazy of an effect as, say, a like Vornklex from earlier, but it certainly is reminiscent of that effect.
You, so for me, it reminds me a lot of like Elish Norn, in the sense that it's like, look, the effect is very simple, but it does make an impact on the game because Elish Norn is just your creatures get +2/+2, opposing creatures get -2/-2. This is the same thing. Like your stuff is going to cost 1 less, everyone else is going to cost 1 more. Um, but I think this one also gets kind of a reputation for being unfun or salty because of the colors. Because white and blue tend to be a lot more restrictive or removal based colors.
Right. Yeah, I think this is similar to Baral in that you're reducing your counter spells by one. It's not refueling your hand, but if you decide to build this in a way where you're stacking like, Thalia and effects that are gonna increase the mana cost for your opponents, it gets a bit saltier. Whereas if you're just using it to kind of get advantage, I don't think it has to be as salty. But I will tell you that I have run a Grand Arbiter deck, and that commander has received so much removal, you wouldn't even believe it. People do not
Uh,
like Grand Arbiter.
I think people don't like it, but you know, for me, it's okay. I've thought about building it. I think it's one of those things where it receives more hate than it's probably worth. I would argue that Vorinclex, which apparently does seem receive a lot of hate, is a lot worse of a commander to deal with.
At
Uh,
double the cost.
yeah, double the cost, but it's also in green, so we'll see. The next Staxy piece, so we'll hit the three or four Staxy ones we got here, and then we can kind of assess as a whole. I think kill them or be killed. Next up, we've got Gaddock Teague, a green white for a 2/2 Kithkin Advisor. Non-creature spells with converted mana 4 or greater can't be cast, and non-creature spells with X in their mana cost also cannot be cast.
Yeah, so this is a little harder to play against compared to Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth because at least with Grand Arbiter, if you can ramp up to that mana value, you can still play your spells. Gaddock Teague is going to kind of prevent you from casting spells in general. It's going to turn off a lot of the cards in your hand, and if you're playing, a heavy non-creature deck, it might turn off the majority of your deck. Um, it's easier to cast, being that it's only 2 mana, so it's gonna come out more consistently on turn 2, maybe even sometimes turn 1, depending on what cards you're playing with. Uh, but it is a powerhouse. Maybe not necessarily a huge Staxy card, but it definitely restricts the game in a special way.
I think this is the first one we've seen too where Grand Arbiter slows down your ability to play, but this one actually kind of hoses you in the deck building process long before you know that you're actually going to sit down and play against it. Because,
Right.
like you said, if you've got a big mana deck and you just turned off, you know, a big chunk like instant sorceries, enchantments, artifacts that have 4 or greater, that's a huge swath of cards that a lot of people rely on their deck.
Absolutely. So it's hard to say which one is saltier because if you're playing a creature deck, this Galactique really isn't going to affect you very much at all. Whereas Grand
Mm.
Arbiter is going to be constantly affecting you. But if you're playing anything that wants to benefit from high CMC enchantments, artifacts, or instants and sorceries, you're going to be pretty upset to sit across from a Galactique player.
For sure. Uh, Next up, I'm going to go on record here and say that this next commander does not exist because I've never seen anyone play it. I see it pop up all the time on like commanders I hate, saltiest commanders that I would refuse to play against, but I've
Hmm.
yet to ever see it in the flesh or on the cardboard at a table, and that is Cory Dust Drinker.
Right.
Um, two white for a 2/2 spirit. Lands don't untap during their controller's untap step. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player untaps a land he or she controls. So it's basically Winter Orb on a creature.
Yeah, it's if you can find ways to bounce this creature and play around with it not being on the field during your own upkeep, this can
Mm.
be arguably one of the saltiest creature cards that we've spoken about today. But if your deck is, I agree with you that I've never seen this. I've never seen it played. I've heard of it, and I've maybe it had seen a lot more play back in 2005 when it came out, or in the early stages of
Mm.
Commander and Elder Dragon Highlander. But at this point, it's not a card that I'm super concerned about. If somebody was playing me with a Hokori deck, I'd have fun the first time, and then I'd say, hey man, I don't got we'd play a little differently the next time.
I think, I mean, this has got to be one of those decks where, like, if you play a commander for the next 20 years and you went to your various LGSs, maybe you hear somebody tell you that one friend of theirs or they knew somebody that once played somebody that had a Hokori deck. But I think this also proves the argument, which is saltier the commander. So if a commander's super salty, it tends to go one of two ways in popularity. Either you never see it because nobody wants to play it, or it becomes like, top five commander of all time being built online.
Right.
It's true because we haven't tackled some of them, but a lot of the names that popped up on the salty commander for EDH rec list were a lot of the like top 10 most built commanders. The Atraxas, Edgar Markov, Aloro, um, Dragon. Things that are like either it's very popular because it's so powerful and obnoxious, or it's Hokori and you never see it.
Right. So it kind of like it handles itself in that sense. If you're in a pod with somebody who regularly plays Hikori Dust Drinker, my heart goes out to you, and keep an eye on all that dust because they're going to be slurp slurp slurp.
You have a two-headed giant game of Hikori Dust Drinker and Gaddock Teague teamed up against you. You're just gonna troll every two-headed giant event at every LGS.
Woohoo! No thanks.
So we've got one more kind of like Staxy commander, and then I think we assess them as a whole. So the next one up is Derevi, Imperial Tactician, green, white, blue for a bird wizard. It's a 2/3 with flying. Whenever Derevi enters the battlefield or a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may tap or untap target permanent. And then for one green, white, blue, you can put Derevi on the battlefield from the command zone.
Yeah, Derevi is a bit stacked, and its ability to avoid command tax is just at the cherry on top of that. But if you choose to use it to tap down your opponent's creatures and you know lands and that sort of thing, then that's good for you. But
Mm.
I often find that this is used in correlation with things like Winter's Orb or Static Orb to like untap and play around with untapping your own stuff to significant advantage. And
Mm.
it's a flyer. Flyers are OP, so that's all I have to say on
Yeah, I
that.
mean, you're always, let's be honest, with this thing coming out as a 2/3 flyer, you're always going to have a freebie attack, to get that combat damage in.
Right.
What I find interesting is, no, I don't have the best timeline on this, but you think them putting this four mana like avoid the command tax line on there was them going, well, we messed up on Imminence, so let's put this out, and we didn't learn, so later let's make Commander Ninjutsu for Uriko.
Well, I think Derevi is older than the Eminence
Imminence.
commanders.
Okay.
So I think Eminence was kind of like, yeah, that's the problem with like kind of commander centric product is that sometimes they release something that is like so strong that you feel like they might not ever do it again because of that. Like this ability and a lot of the abilities that escape the price of commander tax are met typically with, people don't really like them. It doesn't feel good to remove a Yuriko and then she just comes back. Or I guess she doesn't have Commander Ninja. I don't know. Was that just
Mm.
Yuriko as Commander Ninja too, or like it's awful?
Yeah.
It's awful. So
So yeah, but I would almost argue that Derevi has like the tamest of those abilities in the sense, like in this specific window, right? That Eminence I can't interact with at all because I can't do anything about them sitting in the command zone. Commander Ninjutsu, you're gonna time that in a certain way, like that I can't really interact with it as well either. Now, Revi, yeah, when he enters, he's tapping and untapping, but that's going to be relative to what I'm tapping or untapping.
Sure.
Then he's stuck on the battlefield until he gets destroyed or whatever. Whereas your typical Yuriko deck, is going to pop out with Commander Ninjutsu attack, wants to be destroyed, or return to hand or something like that so we can recycle the ninjutsu ability.
Right. Yeah,
But
overall, I think it if you abuse it, it's gonna be too powerful and it's gonna induce salt. If you don't abuse it, it's not that bad.
yeah, I mean, and this is in perfect colors for blinking too. So this is definitely a deck that you could easily put like your ephemerates or your planar incisions or any of those kind of things where you just blink it, tap down or untap, you know, over and over again. You're freed from the reels, those kind of things.
Right.
But those four, I would say collectively are our Stacks quadrilogy. What do you think? I mean, Stacks in of itself gets like a salty rep. Is Stacks as viable in Commander, do you think, as people make it out to be?
I mean, it's yeah, it definitely is. It's a viable CEDH strategy. If you're playing against people who want to cast spells on time or ahead of curve, preventing them from doing that is viable. And if you have ways to capitalize on it, it is viable. But what can
Mhm.
end up happening is like people can learn and kind of adjust their play style accordingly. And if you don't have enough hate bears to hate everybody out of the game, they're going to use all they have to defeat you so that everybody else can play the game in a way that they'd like to. The other relevant thing here is that like some stacks pieces affect other players more than others. Like if you're looking at Hokori, if I'm playing a deck that relies on artifacts for my mana rather than
Sure.
lands, you tapping down everybody else's lands is just going to bring me up to the top and everybody else down to the bottom. So it's not 100% the end all be all of all magic. It's not the strongest gameplay mechanic, but it is relevant and it's there. So you got to play around it.
Oh, that's true. Like you said, so Hokori, if you're playing like a landfall deck, then Hokori is going to be obnoxious to deal with. But if you're playing, Azorius artifacts or Boros artifacts or something like that, then it's still going to slow down your game because you're eventually going to need to get at least the first land out to get your soul ring or something. But in the long run, I mean, you're going to rebound faster than a lot of other people.
Right.
So out of these four, what are we thinking? Kill, or be killed?
Well, for the most part, I'll say it's all right because personally, I'm not too. I run a lot of removal. I feel like I can handle a lot of things if I need to, but I don't mind the
Mm.
game getting slowed down a little bit because I play a lot of mid-range decks that kind of benefit from longer games. So sometimes they kind of help me out.
Yeah, I agree. Like for me, Grand Arbiter is fine. For the same reason, I play a lot of like Grixis control or mid range decks that like I'm packing a bunch of removal, so either this thing's going to be removed, or I'm okay with the board being kind of controlled in a certain state until I can build up my board state. Um, Revi, same thing. Like, yeah, there's busted things you can do with the Revi. There's certain things I wouldn't want you to tap and untap, but it's not inherently broken itself. Um, I think Hikori and Gaddock Teague I would not enjoy playing against.
Uh huh.
I don't I don't like the fact that Gaddock Teague basically ruins me before the game started, so to speak, because if my deck is like, I don't know, big mana spell slinger, then I'm really SOL.
Hey, well, play a good deck and you won't have a problem with it. That's it. That's right. I'm
That's
claiming
true.
right
That's
here, right
true.
now, that creature decks are the only good decks in Magic the Gathering.
It's like what do they say? Like Stormcrow's the best creature because it's a 2/2 with flying. It's gonna be the same argument as like, no, creature decks are the best decks because they get around Gaddock.
Stormcrow descending, winter is ending. Stormcrow arriving, winter is thriving.
Was it Colossal Dreadmaw? You know, it's a 4/4 trample, yeah, or 6/6 with trample. You know, think of all the things it blocks.
Blockers are OP. I'll take that to the grave.
Which is why Arcades is our next salty commander. Yeah, I think I could live with all four of them. So Augustine, Revi, and Hokori are pretty much in the same boat. A lot of people did not like Gaddock though.
Yeah, I think Galactic again, it shuts off so many decks that it probably is rightfully deserving of that hate.
Yeah, I was surprised that more people did not hate on Hokori, to be honest with you. Um, because like I said, it's that one and Augustine, like staples of the top 10 commanders I hate to see the list.
Right.
Again, I think Hokori gets a pass in the fact that like I'm 100% certain it does not actually exist. I'm pretty sure it's like a invention of MTG alchemy.
I could very much see that. But I've never had the misfortune of playing against it.
Now what's going to happen is in our comments, like the comments on this video are going to be, I love Hokori. Hokori, here's my list, and it's going to be a bunch of like Hokori ephemerate shenanigan decks.
Yeah, this is gonna piss
Um,
off the Hikori fanboys for sure.
the Hokori cult. Um, so moving on, we're gonna move from stacks now into commanders that are just sort of salty because they control the game to a point, and not control the game with stacks, but control the game with just a presence they put on the board. Uh, so a good transition for this because it's a little bit of stacks, it's a little bit of board control, and it's a little bit of OP nonsense. Is Coma Cosmos Serpent. So we've got
Ooh boy.
three, 2 green, 2 blue for a total of 7 mana. You get a 6/6 Serpent, not be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature named Coma's Coil. You could sacrifice another serpent to choose one. Tap target permanent. Its activated abilities cannot be activated, or to give Coma indestructible until end of turn.
Right. Yeah.
Blow it up before they bring it on their turn. You blow it up before they pass to the next person's upkeep. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the fact that the spell is uncounterable is deplorable because as soon as Coma hits the field, it pretty much takes over the game. Coma's coils are 3/3s, and you're going to make 4 of them in one turn rotation, giving you the ability to pretty much either protect Coma or shut off all of your opponent's boards. The tapping target permanent is like extremely relevant. Activated abilities not being able to be activated this turn, extremely relevant. You know, you can shut down people's just ability to interact with Coma, and then God forbid they have a way to destroy it because you're going to be able to sack a serpent in response and give Coma indestructible. Oh, I hate this card. It's a 6/6 for 7, which seems undercosted, but it's only because it gives you so much that, you know, it'd be insane to buff the stats on this guy.
And and that's before you get into the fact of like it's Simic good stuff as well. So this deck's gonna have so much draw, so much ramp, so many just shenanigans out there that you go like, all right, well, this thing has indestructible, but they could also be rocking a counter spell, but they've also got like 8 mana because they're ramping every single turn with their nature's lores and 3 visits.
Their
Uh,
Simic deck.
yeah, those monsters, those disgusting monsters. I don't, yeah. The tapping thing too is also obnoxious because of the turning off activated abilities. Like tapping down blockers is annoying, but if you just go Every turn, I want to get rid of the one activated ability that's going to cause me the most problems. Okay, there it is. And you just shut down somebody's game plan.
Yeah, if you need to, you can hold out one of these abilities for each person's turn, or you can, spend your serpents on one person if you only have one, real threat to your board state. So it's just a overall very overpacked card that immediately takes over the game as soon as it's cast. So you better counter it. Oh wait, you can't.
Well, and that's the other thing is too, like, this gives you like a good shot at a go wide strategy because they're tokens. I wonder if there's anything in green that could double the amount of tokens you bring out.
No, that's really just a oh no. It's entirely a green effect.
Like, oh, this card is disgusting. Now, have you ever run into somebody actually playing Coma?
Absolutely. It's a pretty popular Simic commander.
So I ran into somebody online, and they did not build a Coma deck, but they thought they built a Coma deck, and they put the wrong commander in the command zone.
Who'd they put up there?
AC, the Gyre Strait.
I'd much prefer that.
Yeah, I prefer that too. But as I'm talking to them, they had everything, like they had all these like heraldic horn or heraldic banner, herald's horn, Urza's incubator, all this stuff in order to like buff up an all serpent deck, and they didn't go with Coma.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fun alternative to Coma is just not playing Coma. I think that
That's
might be
true.
the solution to that issue.
Do you hate Coma? Well, go ahead and play Tatiova. It's Coma. That it also has water.
And none of the relevant abilities.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's Coma. Like I said, it's a little bit of stacks. It's a good transition because it's a little stacks. It's a little bit of just obnoxious board presence. But speaking of obnoxious board presence, I think we've got. I don't know. I say this like every time we flip to one that I think we've got the most hated commander of all time. But I legit think this is like the most hated commander of all time.
Well, if you're talking about a certain old man, I might have to agree with you.
That's right. We're talking about Gaddock Teague. Yeah, no, we're talking about Urza, Lord High Artificer. This is not the one that lets you go to askurza.com, by the way, because that is a beloved old man. um, 2 and 2 blue, you get Human Artificer. It is when Urza enters the battlefield, you're going to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Next, you can tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue mana. Then for 5 colorless, you can shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. 1/4, by the way.
So yeah, he's tanky to boot. He creates you creatures on ETB, so he can be
Mhm.
blanked. He creates mana by tapping your untapped artifacts, so now like treasures are even stronger because they're gonna, you're gonna get way more bang for your buck. And then
Mhm.
on top of that, he's an outlet for infinite mana. If you have infinite mana, you are winning the game on the spot. You're spending all of it into his, activated ability, and unless of course he gets comaed, but then you're just going to do it on top of that. You're going to exile your entire deck and play everything, and hopefully win on the spot because you've planned for this and not be caught with your pants down and a whole board on your library and no way to finish the game.
I've been in 2 games, exactly 2 games that have had this commander out, right? I will say that both times the person running him was absolutely obnoxious about their ability to win. So, first time was about a year ago. you and I went to Command Fest and we were playing Two-Headed Giant, and this guy played his Urza with like his 50 little artifact shenanigans. You know, this one untaps that one to tap this one to cost reduce that one to whatever. And he told us from the get go, I'm gonna win. This is my Urza deck. You don't even stand a chance. I got Urza, Urza, Walking Ballista, Urza.
Right.
The second time was at Gen Con a month ago. There I was with Urza, the most obnoxious person. I drafted Urza and Gonti as like a partner commander,
Very fun.
and the the power I felt coursing through my veins that day, Cole.
Uh-huh.
It was like, you can't give every Jedi a taste of the dark side or they'll convert. That's what was happening. I had Urza. I had 10-10 colorless like constructs. And then I flashed, or I dropped out Gonti and pulled from the top of someone else's deck I think it's Whirler Thopter or something like that. It's like tap two untapped artifacts to give something unblockable. So I was making my 10-10 constructs unblockable, and I was just oh I was so overwhelmed.
With options, with power. You straight up went to the dark side.
I didn't even hesitate. It was the first pack I opened. I saw Urza and a Gonti right behind it, and I was like, "Well, 1-2, thank you very much." Um, yeah. Now this is the okay. I'll put it like this. I had the fun Urza, right, which is the make big things happen Urza. There is a real dark side to Urza, which is the make 30-minute turns happen Urza. And I think that's why Urza hits the salt level as well.
Absolutely. When you're, playing mono blue, everybody's already got a target on your head, so you got to play your turn pretty perfectly. So, it might take you a lot of time to contemplate how you're going to execute your, evil maniacal plan of playing static orb and then passing turn or something, that's so crazy that only an absolute madman could imagine.
Yeah, so the problem with Urza is usually not the construct, it's the other two abilities that cause these turns to go super long. So you get a lot of like, I'm gonna tap this artifact for blue. Then I'm gonna use that blue mana into this artifact that lets me, pay 2 blue to untap an artifact. So I'm gonna do that to untap this artifact. I'm gonna tap it again to make more mana to pay into this, untap that, and then I'm gonna put 5 towards playing the card off the top of my deck, and then you just see like a ton of wheels spinning. And if you're on the other side of the table, it can be very unfun to just watch that and try not to zone out.
Yeah, I'll come back in 30 minutes with, my Chick-fil-A meal all done and ready to go and see how you're playing.
Yeah, and a lot of times, they might win because maybe the 'cause maybe okay, let's say maybe they do. They've got a walking ballista in their deck that's gonna be their win con, and they're just doing the 50 steps it's gonna take them to get enough mana to pay into that last ability over and over and over again until they get to the walking ballista.
Right.
Do you want to sit there and watch that and not play the game? It's just sort of like a okay, explain your combo and then show me that it works, and then I'll go ahead and shuffle up and we can play something else.
After a certain point, it is a deck that is so quick to become, the king of the table. Nothing can be done to stop it. That why play it at a casual table when you can just bump it up and make it a CEDH deck? It is pretty hard to have a powered down Urza deck, as far as I'm aware, unless of course you're drafting it and you're pretty limited in your options of cards.
Yeah, I mean, I will say even drafting it, I definitely felt like I was running away a little bit. Um, because with Commander Masters, they gave all the mono-colored commanders partner, like formally they all have partner. for drafting purposes. So with that and Gonti, I was doing things like Feed the Swarm, Toxic Deluge, on top of the regular Urza artifact shenanigans. So you definitely, if you build a very simple artifact deck, I think you're already running away a little bit over a lot of other players.
Yeah, I think this is a safe bet for the saltiest, one of the saltiest commanders of all time. Do we have any
And
fun
that's,
alternatives that like a way to replace him?
yeah, I think Urza. So obviously you can go for other artifact based commanders. There's the Urza Precon, that was a lot of fun. I personally think it would be very interesting in seeing Meld Urza, which is the Planeswalker. So that one is it's Urza Lord Protector is the creature side, and that's just one white and a blue. It's a cost reducer for your artifact, instants, and sorceries. And then you can like pay 7 to meld Urza with a with an artifact, the Might Stone and Weak Stone, and then you can make this Planeswalker that you can trigger multiple times a turn.
Sure.
So I like that because it does the artifact thing. Like you get a cost reducer on the artifact, but you can also do spell slingers with instant sorceries. The Might Stone and Weak Stone has like a cool ETB where you can either draw some cards or you can something -5/-5 till the end of the turn, and then you can also tap it for 2 colorless to be used on basically artifacts and abilities. But the Planeswalker's a lot of fun. So you can like draw cards, you can make artifact creatures, you can exile things. It's essentially if you look at everything that Azorius wants to do, they put it in a Planeswalker.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. In activating abilities twice, you have 5 different abilities to work with, and the ultimate, which is not super hard to get, being that you start at 7 and it's a -10, is a
Mhm.
one-sided board wipe that is going to leave you with a pretty advantageous position.
Well, and I like it too in the sense that if you look at like memorable games, you're gonna remember the guy that played Urza Lord High Artificer because of the grindy game they put you through, most likely. But on the flip side of that, you're gonna remember the person that melded Urza into the Planeswalker because it's just like, oh, it's a cool, unique thing that you're not gonna see a lot.
Right, having to play 2 commanders and without having partner, like having to search your deck for the Might Stone and Weak Stone, gives you kind of a
Mhm.
fun mini game that you don't have a hard time doing because you're in Azorius, so you have all sorts of ways to tutor artifacts to your hand. So
Yeah,
I think it's a fun alternative that is maybe the more impressive Urza.
yeah. So I think you always leave games with memories for one of two reasons. Either it was like a miserable game or a great game. This is one of those things where it's like it's a unique commander. It's a lot of fun. Even if you're losing, you're just like, wow, they pulled off essentially the like what would be considered like quote unquote the most powerful being in Magic and
Right.
unleashed it upon you. So that it's unique. Lord High Artificer, I kind of get why they had to make him super powerful because again, versus quote unquote the most powerful being in Magic. So when they first made that card, it was the first time he was printed. So they're like, well, we have to make him kind of busted.
Right.
But I will say Urza is the third of the three, going back to Turgrid and Tox Roll, the third of the three, like, absolutely loathe, don't let this thing near me, don't let it touch the table. I will also announce that because I have that Urza, I'm planning on building it.
Now you're talking about Urza the High Lord Artificer there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
it was fun being in your play group.
I've considered building the Planeswalker one too, though.
Well, either way, you can stick the Lord High Artificer into the Planeswalker one, but you can't do it the other way around. So I think you got your answer right there.
Oh, you're right. It's gonna be all the Ursas. I'm gonna just put them all in one deck.
Uh huh.
Next up, we're gonna talk about another kind of old school ish. take over the board type. Cole, what do we got here?
So I think we could talk about this one pretty quickly. It's Narset the Enlightened Master. This is a blue, red, and white and three for a human monk. She's a 3/2 with first strike, hexproof, and whenever Narset attacks, exile the top four cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non creature spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. So this is like an old school powerhouse commander. You might have seen it at the head of a Super Friends deck. You might have seen it at the head of a extra combats and extra turns deck, and that's kind of where it takes its powerful swing. If you're able to get this out pretty early, it has first strike, it has hexproof, so it's not going to be easily removed, and it's going to quickly contact one of your opponents that doesn't have a blocker or doesn't have enough blockers to get through your barrage of instants and sorceries. And quickly you see that how insanely strong this card is. By doing a little bit of math, you can put enough extra turn spells in from blue and enough red extra combat spells to pretty much win the game on the spot, by casting, getting 4 extra turns if you're lucky, on one combat, giving you another four opportunities to do the same thing. So it's a brutal card if you build it in that direction, but it doesn't have to be if you can keep yourself from pouring in all these extremely strong spells. But regardless of what you do, as soon as you sit down at the table and you bust out Narset, anybody who has played against the old school attack once, win the game Narset is going to have their hackles up and be kind of ready to respond.
Yeah, this is a lot of so you pack this thing full of extra turns, full of removal, stuff like that, and you're right, you attack once and you're putting a huge dent on the board. So it's definitely a brutal commander, I think. It is one where if it burns you once, you have one game against it. I think every future game anybody ever plays Narset, you're looking at them warily.
Exactly. You're creating an enemy at the commander reveal.
Um, Moving on from Narset, let's look at a couple other like pushed commanders. That are like ironically from the same cycle as each other. So we've got Corvold, Fey Cursed King. We're gonna also look at Chulane, Teller of Tales. So they both came out in the Brawl decks, 2018, 2019, somewhere in there.
Right.
But Corvold is 2 black, red, green for a 4/4 flyer. When Corvold Fakehurst King enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. When you sacrifice a permanent, you put a 1/1 counter on Corvold and you draw a card.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's that strong off of just reading it, but you sacrifice so many things, just playing the game regularly, that when you have a deck that's built around sacrificing it, it just
Mm.
becomes such a powerhouse, such a strong deck. Like your treasures not only now generate you a mana, but they buff up your commander and they draw you a card. So if you're able to make 20 of them or 17 of them, you're able to kill somebody in one shot with Corvold, which isn't the craziest thing you can do with Corvold. It's mainly just fueling your hand at no cost in a very easy way. It's just maybe uncreative because it doesn't it doesn't require you to leap through as many hoops as other commanders to get as powerful of an effect.
And this is one that's gotten stronger, I think, as the game goes on. Because like you brought up treasure. I mean, Corvold treasure decks are pretty pushed these days. And there's a ton of ways you can make treasure, and you can make a lot of treasure. But yeah, having 10 ish treasure. Like I like to use 10 as like my benchmark for a lot of things. But you're right. So if you have 17 treasures, 21 commander damage. Um, you could literally bring out Corvold, turn Corvold sideways, sacrifice 16 treasure for no reason. All those counters on there, draw 16 card, and then Corvold's attack trigger, you have to sacrifice a permanent, so then you sacrifice that 17th. So put another counter on it and draw another card.
Yeah, and not to mention, maybe do something. If you're not doing it during the combat step, you might have something to actually do with that 16 mana you generate and those 16
Mm.
cards you draw. So it's a deck that just once it starts going, it can be a little bit difficult to shut off, and maybe is a little bit stronger than a lot of other commanders at that price, that mana cost price point.
Mm. Now, I have considered this before, but I like the idea too of like if you had this and uh Cavern Horn Dragon, the newer one that lets
Mhm.
you mess with people's artifacts, like that might be an interesting build too, because then you could copy everyone's artifacts and just have those to sacrifice.
Absolutely.
I think Ancient Copper Dragon's another great fit in here, where you roll that d20 and make however many treasure based off of the hit.
Yeah, I think this commander pairs well with a ham sandwich, meaning like it pairs well with pretty much anything. It is a very strong commander.
I think here's a good idea to tell you how strong it is, right? So with Wild Eldraine coming out, they made a new Corvold, and in order to balance this one out, because of mistakes were made on the last one, they had to make it cost 3 more mana, and they had to downgrade its effect that much more. So like the new Corvold is 8 mana. Um, Now it does cost one less for like card types among permanents you sacrifice. Now that does make it worse than old Corvold, because you can't say sacrifice like 5 treasure. That would only reduce it by 1 because those are all artifacts. But then you like get combat, or when you deal combat damage, you put counters on it and draw cards based off of like permanents in your graveyard. The fact that they had to strip down the effect and tack on a bunch more mana for the cost shows you how pushed the original one is.
Yeah, I was very pleased when I saw this new Corvold, because it seems like a really fun alternative if you've played Corvold in your play group and realized how strong it is. Maybe you're not able to play your Corvold as much because it's just pretty advantageous, and this is a great way to be like, well, it's not that Corvold and mean
Mm.
it. You know
You know what I was like a little disappointed in though?
what's that?
Um, so when you look at some of these standards, they've reprinted like softer versions of them, so to speak. Like they've reprinted or they've made new Urzas that aren't
Right.
as oppressive. They made a new Narset a couple sets ago. It's not as aggressive. They've just made a new Carvold, but what they did not make is a new Chulane. Where's my new Chulane? So the other one we're gonna look at is Chulane, Teller of Tales. Chulane is 2 green, white, blue. For a 2/4 with vigilance. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, and then 3 and tap. You can return target creature you control to its owner's hand.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is disgusting.
you know how you said with Gaddock Teague, like creature decks are the best deck?
Uh-huh.
Empirically, it's the best deck. Yeah, this is why, because you go creature, draw a card, ramp. Creature, draw a card, ramp. It just it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like the land comes in untapped. You could draw a card, which is probably going to be a creature because I'm sure you built that deck this way. If it's not a creature, you're going to pay 3, bounce like your little 1 mana Llanowar elves or something to your hand, and repeat this disgusting cycle.
It encourages you for doing things you're already going to be doing, which is kind of where it's similar to the reasoning behind Corvold being so strong. Is just that your deck is always going to play creatures, so you're always going to be receiving the benefit of this. And like you said, if you're building Tulane, you're probably primarily creatures to maximize on that ability, and the land coming in untapped just allows this to go a little bit you know a little. It just feels a little pushed because you can have a turn where you're, like you said, returning mana dorks and just getting so much benefit from it, and
Mm.
it's hard to compare.
Yeah, and with the ramp too, like getting around the one land per turn kind of deal. This is easily the kind of deck where you could go like Avenger of Zendikar, and then keep on a little loop of bouncing your mana dork to your hand to keep putting out a new land each turn, or each time, and suddenly you've got these obnoxious plant tokens, or you build up so much land and so many creatures that suddenly you crater hoof and just wipe people off the board.
Yeah, I am. I am fond of everybody having fun in a commander game, and so because of that reason, I'm less fond of commanders that just make the game way too easy for the person playing them. And come at me on that because I'm a fan of commanders that are a little less ubiquitous, so I'm a little bit partial in that sense.
Well, and I think too, this suffers from the Urza dilemma of like how long of a turn is too long, because if you built this deck just right, you could go Llanowar Elf, draw a card. Look, that card is a land. Put out my land. Tap that one land for my next one. My next mana dork. Draw another card. And you like in theory, if you've got enough cards in hand, you could spin this wheel countless times and just suddenly have like all the lands in my deck are on the field, and I've drawn everything else into my hand.
I think that's a great point. Also for the fact that like you don't really know at any point how like okay, a typical commander game, you're kind of anticipating what you're gonna do on your next turn, and so when it
Mm.
comes to me, I untap. I have an idea of my game plan. Well, with Chulane, every time you cast a creature spell, you're drawing a card and playing a land. So even your every turn you're casting a Llanowar Elves and then drawing a card, ramping, and completely changing your game plan. So it's going to take longer turns because it's harder to prepare for prior to that turn's upkeep.
Uh, you know, if you're digging, let's say you're digging 4 or 5 cards into your deck each turn. I mean, you're basically getting a new hand each turn, so it's even worse than just going like, "What am I doing before the upkeep?" It's just, "Hey, we're on the roller coaster together. Hopefully, I hit something to either knock you out or end my turn."
Otherwise, we're going to be here for a long time watching you spin your wheels and, getting nothing out. So it's a deck that I think is maybe benefits somebody who has a little bit more experience with the game because you have to make so many decisions so frequently and kind of assess like how to how to change the direction of your turn every single turn, which can definitely be a bit salt inducing when I'm maybe just like playing a land, attacking and passing.
All right, so out of these four that we just checked out, let's say five from Coma on down. Where do we stand on these? Like salty, not salty?
Well, personally, I fall on the saltier side. I think if you're looking at
Mm,
Coma, you're looking at Urza, you're looking at Corvold, you're looking at Chulane. I'm like I said earlier, I think that it's an easy deck. It builds itself. It's a deck that builds itself, and
mm.
that's fun for some people. But personally, I kind of find the fun in building a deck and having it be unique. This you're typically just going to be either doing nothing but casting creatures or doing nothing but trying to make treasure tokens and pop off or make serpents and control the game. It just doesn't allow for super unique gameplay because the gameplay is so similar every time.
These definitely of the five, right? I think they all kind of build their own deck. Now, Narset's the one that gives you the most leeway as far as like what is the right build. But if you build the most aggressive, extra turn only Narset deck, that's going to be obnoxious to deal with too. But I agree that Narset is maybe like the softer one you could have, and other four are like if you build the most basic Urza deck, it's already a salty deck. If you build the most basic Chulane deck, it can already be a salty deck to play against.
Absolutely.
I'm not building, if I'm going to put Chulane in there, I might not necessarily be trying to build CEDH Chulane, but I'm not going to build Spellslinger Chulane. It's definitely going to be creatures, and just by that very fact, I've now made that deck salty.
Absolutely. I very
But
much agree.
there you guys have it. Our take on the saltiest of salt commanders throughout CEDH. Now, remember, if you do decide you want to play any of these, you're a terrible person. You should be banned from all play groups. And I look forward to your budding career in Yu-Gi-Oh, where games end in 2 turns. But for everybody else, hey, remember to ban them from your table and kick them out to Yu-Gi-Oh. But no, seriously, guys. Obviously, talk to your play group. It's one of those things you're going to hear 1,000 times, and you're hear 1,000 more times. But rule zero, rule zero, rule zero. There you guys have it. Question of the week is going to be a little interesting. We're going to do question of the week, card of the week, and then we're going to hop on out. Question of the week. This question comes from Tyler, and he would like to know: is there an instant or sorcery you run in mono color you feel needs more play? I.e., it should be a staple for that color in your opinion, but it isn't touted as such. So, what kind of cards are out there in mono colors that you think should be staples, but maybe aren't getting the recognition they deserve from the greater community?
So we went ahead and picked 5 cards for this. We did one for every color, and there were some cards that we had on the chopping block because they weren't in the instant or sorcery category. There are some really great, artifacts and enchantments and that sort of thing, but we're not talking about that. We're only talking about instants and sorceries.
Mm.
So maybe we kind of split them up and go through them
Oh,
as we drafted them. I
sure.
think for black, a really great instant or sorcery that is not as highly seen because it does have a bit of a price tag is Imp's Mischief. This is 1 and a black for an instant that changes the target of a spell that has a single target, and you lose life equal to that spell's mana value. I can't tell you how many times this has, saved my game-ending play when somebody tries to, remove that one vital piece, and Imp's Mischief and turn it around on them. And nobody expects that kind of effect when you're playing black, so it can catch everybody off guard and typically creates for pretty cinematic moments.
No, that's a very like red, blue, or white kind of effect. Um, yeah, it's great. This is your bolt bends, your deflecting swats, your um swerve is another one in Is It Colors, where you're just pointing a spell in the other direction. And if you're holding up 2 black mana, I don't think anyone's really suspecting you of having this card.
Now, next on our list is Reverent Silence. This is a green sorcery for 4 mana that says if you control a forest, you may have each other player gain 6 life instead of paying Reverent Silence mana cost, and it destroys all enchantments. Now, this is a pretty old card, but it is part of a cycle of free cards, and this one is pretty relevant. If you're playing a deck that doesn't use a lot of enchantments, like you're playing an artifact deck or you're just ramping up in green, it's nice to be able to deal with a lot of pesky enchantments really quickly. And the fact that this is a potentially free card is really cool. At the end of the day, having your opponents gain 6 life, maybe that can be a negative a factor if you're playing a deck that's very combat focused, but it seems to me like a pretty free way to destroy all enchantments, which are typically a hard to get rid of class of you know uh, cards.
Yeah, especially in green. Next up in red, we've got You Find Some Prisoners, which 1 in a red for an instant. You get 2 options here. So you can either break their chains, which is destroy target artifact, or you can interrogate them, which is exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them, and then until the end of your next turn, you may play it, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so.
I love this
So this is
spell.
just a. Hmm?
Go on, go on.
Oh, it's a great one. This is sort of like a half Abrade and half Jessica's Will kind of spell. So if you just need easy artifact removal, it's right there. If you just need, if you want to dig for some answers or you want to disrupt somebody's game plan, you can also exile the top three cards of their library. I love to play this in like in an Hello deck where I can copy it a couple times because either you're destroying three plus artifacts or you're exiling 9 cards.
It's super versatile. The fact that it can destroy an artifact in a pinch, or get you an answer in a pinch, it's a pretty fun card to play, and it fills a lot of slots.
Moving into white, we've got that classic white removal. Uh, for 2 and a white, we've got Fateful Absence, which is destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller investigates. So obviously, everybody knows Swords of Plowshares, Path to Exile, Generous Gift. This kind of falls in a niche where you don't see it as much. Now, it's nice in that it's another alternative to the swords and the paths. It's also cheaper than Generous Gift as far as cost, and usually having them having them investigate is a little cheaper or a little better than just doing the like, here's your elephant.
Yeah, I think it's a different type of advantage. It does draw your opponent a card, but sometimes that can be the difference between removing a creature and swinging in for lethal, or removing a creature and now having it blocked, or now your creature being blocked by a 3/3 elephant.
Yeah, and I would say that this, like, yeah, they're drawing a card, but it's not as like, that clue is not as game breaking as maybe having them search for land, you know. Because if they're searching out a land that actually is drawing them a card, this one they actually have to pay mana into. It's not as damaging as say destroy target creature that creature's controller draws a card.
Absolutely. I agree. And lastly on our list is Sudden Substitution, which is a blue instant. It costs 2 blue and two colorless for split second, meaning that it cannot be interacted with while it's on the stack. And it says exchange control of target non-creature spell and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it. So this is a very funny spell because you can, trade away a useless token, say a 3/3 elephant token that you were given by a beast within, or I'm sorry, a generous gift, and you can exchange for somebody's expropriate or somebody's, much more relevant spell. I've had some pretty funny plays with this personally, and I think it can be pretty game changing to, take control of somebody's massive X spell when they think they're about to win the game. I love it. I wish it saw more play. It's just a little bit awkward at 4 mana because sometimes you're not going to really have great opportunities to play it, and you're holding up 4 mana and don't have an opportunity to use it.
And there's also the flip side of this, which is you could give the way you would probably read it, right, is you take control of a spell and you give somebody a cheapo creature. Other thing you could always do is you could cast, let's say, an opt or some, cantrippy kind of spell, then do this, give them that opt, and then you go, guess what? I now control your boss creature, or I now control your commander.
Right.
And just, do there's a couple weird shenanigans you can do, but it's very much like a up and ball kind of a magic trick here. But that's question of the week. So Tyler, not only did you get an instant and sorcery, but you got 5 in all the mono colors, so you can decide for yourself if any of these should be staples. If they should be, go ahead and put them in all your decks. Card of the week, Cole.
So we decided to do a bit of a different card of the week this week. Instead of talking about our, what card has been super relevant for us and Commander, we're going to talk about our saltiest Commander decks. Now that is it's going to be 2 cards versus 1 card, but don't lose your hats. Uh, my personal saltiest commander from my own opinion and kind of the reception it's received is going to be Marchesa the Black Rose. This is 1 in Grixis for a legendary human wizard with Dethrone. She gives your other creatures Dethrone, and whenever a creature I control dies with a 1/1 counter on it, I return that creature to the battlefield under my control at the beginning of the next end step. This is a pretty salty card because it can be very difficult for people to remove her or the creatures I control if they have 1/1 counters on them. You might think you can get away with, exiling them, but I typically am going to have a sack outlet to, sacrifice everybody, send them to my graveyard, and get them back on the next end step. As long as Marchesa sees them die, that effect stays. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff with taking control of opponent's creatures, putting a counter on them, sacrificing them, and then even though they go to your opponent's graveyard, you're going to get them back onto your field at the beginning of the next end step. It's a generally salty deck. I really like mine. Mine is primarily a wizard ETB tribal deck, and it's a deck that I've poured a lot of thought into. But if you're not prepared to need that much removal, it can be a tough commander to play against.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those commanders where because of the dethrone mechanic and the fact that they're coming back, it feels like you can't handle a lot of the threats. Like, oh, I just killed this thing and it's back again.
Yeah, there are enough ways to put counters on stuff without attacking that it makes it very difficult to get through this resurrection ability.
Mm. For myself, I also went for what seems to be the common consensus amongst people that I play with, that the saltiest commander I run is Brina, the Demagogue. It's 1 in Orzhov for a 1/3 flying bird warlock, and it's got a bunch of weirdly worded texts on it, but the gist of it is I'm encouraging other players to attack opponents that don't have the least amount of life. I need people to attack the opponent that's not in last place, and I reward them for doing so by letting them draw cards, and then I can put counters on a creature I control. So the way this usually works is I beg and plead and moan about how I'm not the threat, and I tell them all they should attack the person next to me so that they can get a juicy, juicy card. Meanwhile, I'm throwing counters left and right on Brina so that I can smack people for 21 commander damage. It's weirdly effective, I would say.
Absolutely. I think it's very political, and people like to draw cards, but quickly Brina becomes a 11/11 or 13/13, and
Mhm.
all that little combat, oh, it's just 1 damage, oh, it's just 3 damage. It quickly adds up when she's taking out people left and right and has enough white and black interaction to boot to protect herself or destroy others.
That's the key to it, right? Is when the first time you swing with Brina, you're gonna put the 2 counters on, so it's automatically a 3/5. And three commander damage is nothing, but if you make a full turn rotation, then suddenly 2 per each person, so that's 8 counters right there. So it's already 9. 9/11, and then we keep boosting up from there. So once you start hitting people for 9, 11, 13 commander damage in one shot, it becomes pretty threatening. I'll say I don't see it. I don't see why it's salty. I think it's just a fun, fair, good, clean commander.
You would say that.
If anyone thinks that Brina is a salty commander, it's only because they are not fully in tune with the United States political system. They need to become more active in their civil service.
This is just him politically, this is him pulling politics on you right now. He's trying to convince you to change your ways for the benefit of all.
My opponent would run a Marchesa the Black Rose would have you believe that Brina is a salty commander. However, my good people, you should know that Brina is just a humble bird. Unlike the dastardly monsters that would run Marchesa, who would attempt to dethrone you of your ability to kill her creatures, Brina does not do that. Brina humbly sits in her pillow fort.
Well, similar to birds, you are just as cold-blooded when you play this deck. So I think it is a great representation of salt in Commander.
That's true. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out with us today. I know it was a bit long, but I think we covered a lot of salty commanders, and if we haven't discouraged you from playing them, maybe we've inadvertently encouraged you, and now all of your friends will hate us. But thank you for making it to the end of the episode. If you'd like to check either of us out, you can follow Cole at loveandmana.mtg, where he posts things like photo shoots showing off all the secret lair angel decks as he poses himself around his house. You can follow me at Sleevecard. You can follow the podcast at UrCastPod or contact.urcast@gmail.com. But thank you again for making it to the end of the episode. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.